Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to continue our expectations series. Been having a lot of fun with these. 2 players at a time, one from the offense, one from the defense. Today, we're going to talk about wide receiver Nelson Agholor and nose tackle Travis Jones. And here to talk to me about that is John Zajac. John, how you doing?
I'm good, Ken. How you doing, man?
Life is good. Had you on for an episode of That One Play. Thought you might like to do this, and appreciate you joining me for this. It's a fun couple of players to talk about. Nelson Agholor, a player entering his 9th season. He turned 30 in May, so he fits right into the Ravens' veteran wide receiver acquisition rules of getting guys who are 30 years old or thereabouts. Signed to a $3.25 million 1-year deal. It's got some void years attached to it. Don't know how you feel about the void contracts. How are you digging these void contracts?
I mean, I don't know. That's a good question, honestly. I mean, it just depends. Like, I don't know. I mean, we'll see how it plays out. It really just depends on how it plays out, honestly. So I don't love it, but I mean, I guess you kind of got to do it. I mean, they got to bring in some talent, so you got to do stuff like this sometimes.
Yeah, so the Ravens are effectively, what this means is they're spending $2.1 million of 2024 money with a guarantee of no play on the field for it in that season. Now, you do that, you have a pool of money you're working with all the time in terms of what will end up being dead money effectively, that you manage, you try and manage well. And the Ravens were in a situation where they're signing Lamar Jackson. They need to be careful about exactly how much money they might need because of the potential that he would have played on the tag. And then they would have needed it all up front. Of course, when Jackson is signed, there's a lot of cap relief in year 1. And now the dollars given to Beckham and the dollars given to Agholor that are in the void years will hit the Ravens pretty hard in the future, although in 2022 they're cheap. So it's a kick the can down the road move, and the Ravens are one of the teams. We're going to get into this in an episode next week with Brad Spielberger, who's done some great analysis of all 32 teams and exactly how the health of their 3-year cap looks. And the Ravens are not in good shape there. They're about 27th out of 32 teams, I want to say, in terms of where they are, not to spoil his product at all for us.
Sometimes you got to do it. The Steelers did it for years with Roethlisberger, so it didn't always work out for them, obviously, but you got to do it.
Well, fair enough. So let's go on. The other cost to this, and it's one that I was perplexed by, because I think that Nelson Agholor is a player who is still around, probably maybe even now, but he's still around later in the free agent process. That there was a 6th round compensatory pick they got for Josh Oliver signing with the Vikings, and they lost that by signing Nelson Agholor, even though he's a lower end free agent. They gave away a 6th round draft pick, 6th round compensatory pick they would have gotten for Oliver in 2024. So to me, that's a little frustrating. And I know they traded a 6th round in 2024 already to get Voorhees, and it may have been a case where that compensatory 2024, because the way those things are usually structured is any 6th round pick. So they might have been able to give that lower 6th round pick for Voorhees. Not a huge difference, but it might have been 10 or 15 slots in the pecking order that they gave away for that as well. So I'm nonplussed by that, because I didn't really see the need. I didn't really see that Agholor was a player that they had to sign early.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to March, and I think about how dismal and how dark it was to be a Ravens fan at that time. I mean, it was not a great time. We had Lamar pretty much, hey, I'm asking out. I'm getting out of here. We had, Bateman still coming off injury. We have pretty much a depleted receiver room that DeCosta already said, hey, we're going to pretty much flip the room. So I think that this was just kind of like almost an olive branch, like, hey, we're doing something here. We're bringing in a guy. And also then you look at April and a lot of predictions about Ravens taking receiver. We get Zay, but like there was no guarantees that he was going to fall that far. I mean, there was a lot of hype, a lot of people talking about Zay Flowers, as well as some of those other receivers that got drafted right before and right after him. So, I mean, it's almost like we got to do something. This is a guy that has made plays, and that's something that I see with Agholor is like he's one of those guys. It's almost like he's a discount Brandon Cooks almost. He's a guy that like he appears on your NFL highlights 3 or 4 times a year randomly, and you're just like, wow, that was a really good play. So at least you're getting something out of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. And the Ravens, I think, probably understood what the situation with Bateman was at that point. They, have announced some things with regard to Bateman. They're still taking it very easy with him, I think is the wording that's gone. But, we're 2 months away from the start of the regular season, basically today. We're recording this on July 7th. And if they're still talking about taking it easy with Bateman, that has me worried that Bateman's not going to start the season. It would have me worried anyway because, hey, it's a Liz Frank injury, and those often take a full year and change to recover from, which may mean that he's not the same guy at any point during 2023. But then I look at the rest of the room in terms of the X receivers, and I'm thinking there isn't a lot here. Agholor has been a mixed guy in terms of where he's played. He's played some wide left at New England, which, be your typical X role. He's played some wide right, and he's played some slot. And he's been that way for a number of seasons. He's been a mixed use receiver. And I think, if you depend on him to be the X, not sure he's going to be the guy that gives you the route running skills that turn him from a guy who can be covered one-on-one on an island to a guy who demands safety help. And that's what the Ravens really need to generate out of their X receiver this year.
Yeah, I mean, you're 100% right there. He's not that guy. He probably never was that guy, but I mean, he is a guy that you can throw out there, with the hopes that, hey, he can make some big plays. He has made some one-on-one plays. He's made some huge deep catches. He's made some contested catches. I think he works best over the middle. I think that he can create a lot of space. If you watch a lot of the early highlights of last season with him on the Patriots, it's a lot of him creating space in drag concepts and, just slants across the field where he's creating a lot of open ground. So if we can get him in that role, but again, if you're asking him to sub in for Bateman, he's not a 1-for-1 mix in terms of that. And I think that that's going to be something that the Ravens are going to have to struggle with, if we do get, a delay on his return.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. You shouldn't expect to be able to replace a first-round draft pick with a mediocre veteran guy. And of course, Agholor himself was a first-round draft pick, drafted number 20 by the Eagles in 2015. But he ain't a first-round draft pick anymore at this point in his career. And, what I will say, there's some positives here, and I want to get to that. But I think maybe if this is a tell me the good news, tell me the bad news thing, I think the bad news traditionally comes first, and we kind of got to talk about that. He's got a 7.5 yards per target career. That is not particularly good for a wide receiver, but it was 10.9 3 years ago with the Raiders. Now, that is an outstanding number. In fact, it would be the second highest number in Ravens history if you were able to do that this year. So it's really something. And it was on 82 targets, so it wasn't a minimalist number of targets. And he had 50-some this last year. I think he might have had 53 targets last year. So what I have to look at in this is to try and separate how much of what he did is Mac Jones and how much of what he did is Nelson Agholor these last 2 years when he has been pretty bad for New England. So let's talk the bad news and go through some of the statistics that he posted these last couple of years at New England. Or actually, I just went with the 2022 numbers. So there are 84 receivers in the National Football League who had 50-plus targets this last year, wide receivers. The good news, he was 34th in ADOT with 12.1 yards per target. Now, you got to catch the balls, but that's a good start. That means he's basically a deep threat, a little more than an average receiver because the 42nd is the median, or 42nd and 43rd are the median of that. He was 23rd in yak per reception at 4.7. That's good news. Oftentimes, a guy who gets behind the defense is creating a little more yak the guys who don't. But the bad news is that the guys who don't create a lot of yak are typically the receivers who get a lot of attention. So Mark Andrews had a terrible yak year this last year, and multiple defenders were draped on him. Well, Nelson Agholor may be getting a little break in terms of yak because his overall receiving numbers are not particularly good. His overall, threat level as a wide receiver is not particularly good at this point.
Yeah. I mean, to comment on some of that, obviously with Andrews, he's not the number one. But I will say on that Patriots team, it's not like they really had a true number one last year. So I think that there's a little bit of discrepancy with their data with him. Also, like, their offense was a hot mess. I mean, they scrapped everyone from their play calling and offensive room, and Patricia and Joe Judge, like, that was who was running their offense. Like, so it's hard to really look at that Patriots last season and be like, oh yes, this is exactly who Nelson Agholor is now to this day. And then you look at those Raiders highlights, and then you got this guy again burning down the field. And if we can get some of that, I mean, that's what he looked like at Philly, and that's what he obviously looked like there. That's what we're hoping that he is.
We have to come back to that because because his time in 2020 with the Raiders and his time with Philadelphia, frankly, wasn't very good either. I'll get into that later if you want, but it's really 2020 with the Raiders, playing indoors with Derek Carr, who's kind of a guy who can move around a little bit, throw the ball. Is that more who he is with Lamar Jackson, or is it more what he was the last 2 years? And you're right. I mean, the New England offense was an absolute shambles. And that might have mean that he got more attention under those circumstances, and this led to more of this. But there's a whole bunch of other bad. Of 84 receivers, he was 83rd in drop rate, 11.4%. The only guy worse was Darius Slayton, by the way, who a whole bunch of people on Twitter wanted to see come to the Ravens. Darius Slayton's been one of the worst droppers in the history of the National Football League, certainly in recent years. And the problem with Agholor is that really wasn't an aberration. His career rate is 9.5%, which would have been 75th out of 84 in 2022. By the way, very unusual. That year-to-year variation should be high. So 2022 variation should be high for the individual receivers relative to somebody's career numbers, which is based on a lot more targets. And to be at 9.5% career is quite bad for a wide receiver. And Slayton is the one guy who really sticks out in the National Football League as being a worse dropper over a similar, it's not the entire tenure because Slayton's been in the league for less, but that's, in terms of being a worse dropper among contemporaries, he's the guy.
That's for sure. I mean, it's not like the Ravens haven't had that guy a couple years ago with Hollywood Brown. So it's not like we're not used to having a guy like that. And we have a lot of sure hands on the team. So, Mark Andrews, I think Odell's going to be sure hands too. Like, I just think he's going to be a safety blanket as well. We'll see what we get out of Likely. We'll see if Kolar sees the field. Like, Bateman when he does come back. But I just think that when I look at Agholor and why that signing was a good one is just you look at who is in that receiver room. Over the last couple years for Lamar. Like, let's take you back to, 2019, and let's just kind of talk through like the top 4 or 5 guys that they had. They had Hollywood, they had Miles Boykin, they had Chris Moore, Seth Roberts, Willie Snead, and the preseason favorite Jaleel Scott. Yes. And this is another thing I kind of want to get into is just let's talk about how over the years we've had all these young receivers, Tylan Wallace, all these names, Prochet. They flash in 2 or 3 games in the preseason, and the whole fan base gets behind them, and then they completely disappear in the regular season. So I just think that Agholor at least is somebody you're like, hey, this guy doesn't just disappear in the regular season. So we have seen him. We have seen him in highlights every year in his career, regardless if he's having a good or bad season. Again,
I want to say that's fair with regard to the individual players, but we need to be careful not to be revisionist about this. So if we look back at who were the wide receivers in 2019 and 20, I'm not saying they had a bunch of guys who they were really happy with, but in Snead and Roberts, expectations were higher for them than, at that point. And the expectations are now high for Agholor in a probably in a relative sense, at least relative to last year. They certainly are probably higher. I'm just the expectations. I tell you who the expectations are super high for is Beckham.
Yeah.
And that to me is a guy who there's a ton of risk associated with Odell Beckham. If it works out, fantastic. I would love for it to work out. Is there a good chance it doesn't? I think we could be here 2 years from today talking about some other 30-year-old receiver and say, remember Odell Beckham? We gave him a chance at 30 after he'd been, out of football for a year and had been pretty bad the year before that in terms of his regular season results. The guy did have a good postseason, but in terms of his regular season results, had shown this steady decline in yards per target over his career. And I just think, expectations are always higher than they ought to be on any name wide receiver that comes around. So I hate to fall into this trap. And generally speaking, I like taking chances on younger wide receivers who've at least shown a little bit in the NFL ideally, but even if they haven't been in the NFL yet and they're rookies and, I kind of like taking chances on them as well, relative to 30-year-old veterans.
For sure. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think that it was nice to see DeCosta throw darts at the board at the receiver position. He spent draft capital. It didn't work, but he spent high draft capital at that position for years. It's not a lot landed, but it was nice as opposed to with Ozzie. It just felt like we were just kind of waiting for some veteran to cut that we can kind of bring in and make him our own.
Well, I go back to the 2018 draft. Ozzie's best, DeCosta, huge hand in it. And the two receivers they took in that draft were the two worst players by far. So they had 9 guys, I think, who were still in the NFL and a bunch of people getting their second contracts and whatnot. Zach Sealer, their 7th round pick, was the first to get the additional contract. Lamar's the highest paid player in the league. But the 2 guys they drafted were Jordan Lasley, who's most famously known for throwing the ball into the pond at the practice facility and getting his ass cut for that and some other things. And Jaleel Scott, who never showed anything in the NFL. Should be honest about who he was. And it's interesting. They threw darts at the board even then. It's just they hit on all their other darts. It's a double-edged sword here. Number one is the Ravens don't seem to have great scouting of wide receivers. And they can't figure out the injury situations with them. And that seems to be right. And the second problem is they don't develop wide receivers at all. So, and maybe if you want to throw in a third is they had a run first offense that was exceptionally great at what it did with no impetus to change to a wide receiver scheme. And now bringing in Monken, they find themselves extremely poor at the position with the likelihood that the scheme will change. And I think, by all indications, they want it to change, but they don't necessarily have the talent to catch the football.
Yeah, I mean that's for sure. I mean, you're right about like Ozzie threw darts to the board. Like let's talk about that. I just felt like DeCosta in 19 he started throwing higher draft picks. So I'll give him credit for that. I know that didn't work out, but I felt like it was kind of almost an olive branch to the fan base to say, hey, we're going after these guys. We're trying to bring in talent. I mean, for years I've been saying I don't know who the hell is in the Steelers department for receivers,
but they pick them.
We need to double that guy's salary, bring him here. I don't know what the hell they have in the water over there, but they just breed receivers. It's ridiculous.
They know how to develop them too, and they've drafted them well, they developed them well, and frankly, they've cut them loose at the right time. They got rid of Juju at the right time. Chase 100%. Claypool,
Mike Wallace.
Yeah, Mike Wallace is another good one. And who's the fourth? Antonio Brown. They traded. It didn't seem like a good trade at the time to trade him for a 3 and a 5, but it was a great trade.
Yeah, it's crazy, especially like you look at that. He had like a 6-year run, and his stats are just ridiculous from those 6 years. I think that one of the a little tangent here, like one of the biggest travesties if you're a Steelers fan is like the Killer Bees era, not to win a Super Bowl. Like you got to look back at that era and be like, well, that was a complete failure with Roethlisberger, Bell, and Brown just absolutely being the best of their positions and not coming away with any hardware from that. Yeah. Just to go back on an earlier point, talking about Beckham, I think I look at that Beckham signing as almost like the Paul George signing for the LA Clippers. It was almost like we got Beckham so we could get the Kawhi Leonard. We got Beckham. The Clippers signed Paul George so we can get so we can get Kawhi Leonard. We got Odell Beckham, so we can bring back Lamar Jackson.
So if you add that 18 million to Lamar's contract, I don't have any problem with it. I really would be fine if they had just given Lamar the additional money there, particularly if it were in some way not guaranteed. But this is all guaranteed money. It's just it's going to hit the cap like a lead pipe in 2024 in terms of how hard it's going to hurt to not have either. I think it's either 12 or 15 million or whatever the amount is. It basically pushed it all into 2024. He will not be a Raven in 2024 unless they completely renegotiate a contract for him, which I wouldn't think it's any more likely than any of the other 32 teams. Well, maybe it's slightly more likely than any of the 32 teams, but I think it's unlikely that he'll be back in 2024 given the Ravens cap constraints. It's just I really, part of the thing that has me bothered is the void year structure. I really hate. And I understand you're moving around dollars no matter what, but the void year structure is worse and worse with a payroll that's expanding now with a number of cornerstone contracts. And we're probably at a point where the Ravens don't have room for another cornerstone contract. But you have Lamar certainly already signed on the defense. You have Roquan, Humphrey. You're not in a position to take on a cornerstone player like Matabike on the defense, which is maybe bothersome if you think he's going to be good. I'm trying to think on the offensive side of the ball. Who am I forgetting about?
Andrews,
sure.
and Stanley.
Yeah. So that's a lot of cornerstone contracts, and they're big ones. They're not small ones, and they're in the maturing years of those contracts. So they're in the real payout years where the cap numbers hurt. So Jackson is the one exception to that right now, but it's going to accelerate. It's going to get a lot tougher with him to fit in other big contracts with that. And I as a season ticket holder, I've made this comment many times on air here. I do not want a roller coaster ride of tanking and winning. That's fine for a TV fan who can turn off the damn TV. It's not fine for me. I go to these games, give me a consistent product on the field more than a highs and lows product on the field.
Right. I mean, but that doesn't. The Ravens don't strike me as an organization that's ever done that. Even in some of those low points, they're going 9-7, they're going 8-8, they're going 7-9, 6-10, and they're making major changes at that point. I don't see the talent on this roster being anywhere close to those numbers unless you're dropping pretty much all the AFC North games. Other teams are in the same position too. You look at like the Chargers, you look at the Browns, their 2024 is just as hot of a mess as ours. I mean, I think the Chargers are like 75 million over the cap next year. Same with the Browns. There's something gross where they're talking major cuts. We're not talking major cuts. We just might not be able again to keep some of our guys.
That's true.
So I don't think we're going to be losing any of those cornerstone guys. It just sucks that we'll probably lose out on them at a BK, but
as bad as it is, and I would agree with you in this thing, as bad as the Ravens situation is and the difficulty in 3-year cap is, the Cleveland Browns have that awful Deshaun Watson contract that they're going to have to eat and work through. And even if they restructure it, and honestly, he's going to have to turn into a much better football player than he was last year for that to work out for the Browns. I mean, that's an obvious statement, but he's gonna have to refine his ability he had several years ago now before that will work out for the Browns. I think that's the potential really good news in the division is the Browns will be have that millstone hanging around their neck for the next. It could be only 4 years, but it could be 7 or 8 years if they decide to extend him.
Yeah, I know. I mean. That's why I almost like the Odell contract, because again, it just gave us the ability to get Lamar back to the table, and then thank you Eagles again letting us trade back into the first round to get Lamar, and then signing Jalen Hurts and giving him the deal to pretty much say, hey, build my deal off this. I mean, thank you.
That was a
Eagles
good break
for sure. That was So getting us there. So just getting back to Agholor though, but before all of that happens, we bring him in and again, it just looks like something that's like, all right, let's try to rework this receiver room. And again, there's not a lot of talent in the free agency market at that time.
Okay, so we've been interrupted a couple times on this, but I got to go through the rest of 2022 and the bad news before we start turning this around and going, because I want to do it too. I don't want to be the only guy who's giving bad news here, but there is a lot of bad news.
Yeah.
We talked about the drop rate. He's 77th of 84 receivers in contested catch rate. That's terrible. It's a very small number, 2 out of 7, but it's not his thing. And it hasn't really been his thing ever, but it definitely wasn't his thing in 22. 67th in yards per route run out of 84 at 1.23. Some of that's on Jones because obviously that is dependent on a quarterback getting you the ball in an accurate way. 78th in passer rating throwing to him at 72.3 out of 84 guys. Marquise Brown, by the way, 66.4 last year was even worse. That ended up being a pretty damn good trade.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. He had 2 fumbles, Agholor did. That was tied for the third most among receivers. His yards per target was 6.8. I don't have a ranking on that. For whatever reason, PFF gives you a lot of nice metrics, but they exclude yards per target, which is just ridiculous. And so a ranking for that would be nice. But it's not good for a wide receiver. It's not the very bottom, but it's not good. So I just summing it all up, you get the idea. It was a very bad year in New England. There were a lot of things wrong. We don't have to make excuses for them on everything. But I think what we do need to do is we need to figure out why should this be more similar to 2020 with the Las Vegas Raiders as opposed to these last 2 years with New England, and also factor in the aging component of that because Agholor was a 27-year-old man when he had that season, and now he's a 30-year-old man. And there is going to be a difference for that. But let's talk about reasons for optimism. You seem ready to do it. Go ahead.
Hey, I mean, I'm kind of giving you that take a couple minutes ago about just the receiving rooms that Lamar's had to throw to over the years. I already told you the 2019 one, and that was his MVP season. Mm-hmm. So let's just look at 2020. He still got Snead, Prochet, Chris Moore, Duvernay, Des Bryant, the corpse of Des Bryant, I should say.
Yes.
Hollywood and Boykin. So again, all those young guys, couple of which we invested some decently high draft picks. Nothing really came out of that room. Again, it's good season in 2020 as well. So
Brown,
Brown, obviously Hollywood. I mean, that was like kind of who we were hanging our hat on and saying, oh my God, we finally drafted a 1st-round receiver. We did it. The next year we bring in Sammy Watkins. They draft Tylan Wallace, Prochet still there, Duvernay, Marquise, and Boykin. I forgot how long Boykin lasted before we were just kind of like, hey, you can go to the Steelers. It's fine. We'll find someone else to block. And then Bateman. So again, it's just all these young, unproven guys. And then Watkins, which, for years had just been injury. So that was an interesting kind of pickup.
Let's toss Boykin's name out there. Who would you rather have as your backup emergency X receiver this year and number 4 guy, Agholor or Boykin?
Wow.
Boykin gives you a lot on a football field that Agholor doesn't give you.
I mean, but Agholor can still block. The one thing that he's an underrated blocker. So, I mean, I will say, like, I know you're going to hate this take, but like, I'd rather have Agholor. I mean, I can see him making plays. How many catches has Miles Boykin caught? Like, how many times have we seen him make a play? He's made a couple of touchdowns. I don't even know how many touchdowns he has in his career. But I would much rather have Agholor, even though he's less of a blocker.
It's my point is that it's really close. Okay,
yeah.
That it's not far. I mean, here's what I'll tell you: there haven't been a ton of targets for Boykin during the Lamar era, and we know why. You can give the initials of the guy who's most responsible for that. but his career yards per target is 8.2. Agholor is not in that range. I have to look back. I think he was 7.5. Let me get to it. Might be wrong because he did have one really good year 3 years ago, but Agholor is 7.4 career in terms of yards per target. You definitely get a much better blocker with Boykin. And I would agree with you, by the way, that Agholor had been a pretty good blocker prior to last year. And I think that with the Ravens, that will improve again because it has to. He's a guy that they preach it, and I think that they'll get that right. Boykin was just exceptional in that regard, being able to maintain length and position, keep his feet at the time. And I'm not saying right now that I'd rather have 2023 Boykin necessarily be the guy to replace Agholor. But if you're talking about Boykin after his second year or Agholor right now is no doubt in my mind who I'd take. No doubt in my mind.
That's fair. You know, hey,
Okay.
agree to disagree on that.
Sure.
Yeah. And I mean, just looking at 2020, Agholor, you know, he's kind of morphing into a similar, you know, team as he was on then. You know, they had Renfro, they had Waller. I think that was Waller's really good season with them. And then he was kind of their 3. You know, and that's kind of where we're envisioning him as being our like 3 or our 4 or maybe even our 5.
Right.
In you know, that's kind of where we want him. So it's like if we can get a couple guys ahead of him to really show up to the plate, and then he can kind of just come in there and make a handful of big plays and just be out there as a you know, veteran target for Lamar. I think that's all we would want him for. That's all we need him for.
Yeah, absolutely. And a restricted role, 4th or 5th receiver on the team, limiting his snaps, and he still is a speed threat. I mean, I want to get to the reason for optimism because I have stuff on my list too. It's just the 2022 season was terrible. It was a complete toilet flush of a season from Agholor, and it's something that, you know, it's on his permanent record. That's the truth of the matter. But he still brings some speed to the table. He's 4.42 coming out. I don't think he's anything like that today, but he's not 4.6 either. Yeah. And I think that is really one of the things the Ravens probably looked at to decide, can he still take the top off of defense? And when I say take the top off of defense, I don't mean sometimes outrun a single man in a single cornerback when on a single-sided receiver. What I mean is that he also draws safety help on that side because that's what the Ravens really need. Zay Flowers is terrifically important to this team because he brings the speed to draw that safety the way Marquise Brown did. Create space for Andrews underneath, so Andrews is not consistently double covered. Create space for Beckham, who has, you know, other issues with separation, but could use a big body, is a good route runner to get some wiggle at the top. You know, I think there's the hope there. It likely will be a big threat if he can get in the middle of the field without a congestion of defensive bodies being there, as there was for a lot of the Roman era. Same thing could be true of Kolar. You know, just get a good catcher in the middle of the field who could do that. I think the speed is one reason that I would point to for optimism, but he's got to actually translate that speed into gravitational pull on additional defenders. Yeah,
I mean, I'm hoping the speed's there. You're right. That is a huge reason why we signed him. And, you know, we've a lot of our speed guys have gotten hurt. A lot of them have, you know, Bateman goes down, Hollywood had the Liz Frank, you know, Duvernay, like all of our guys that have been the quote unquote, take the top of the defense guys or envision that in that role have only been doing that for a very short time for us, maybe less than a season for most of them. So hopefully, you know, I think throwing another dart at the board at that style position receiver is good. You know, I think that's could help us in the long run. And, you know, look at the Chiefs last year. They threw a bunch of resources behind their receiver room to replace Tyreek. You know, they bring in Juju. They got Kadarius Toney. They brought in MVS, you know, Marquez Valdez-Scantling. You know, they draft Sky Moore. They still had Hardman. And that ended up really helping them because MVS had a huge playoff game for them. I think against the Bengals. I'm not sure. But he helped get them over the hump. And again, that's a 4th, 5th receiver for their team. So if Agholor could be a guy like that, where it's like, hey, we're in a big game here. We just need somebody to show up. Maybe he does show up. So, you know, I have a lot more faith in him than James Prochet to show up in a spot like that.
There's no doubt about that. Obviously, we're not going to disagree on that one at all. But it's anyway. We're trying to be positive here. That the speed is one thing that I think the Ravens really looked at as being this can help us. The other thing being that he had some experience at X, had been used there some, certainly not as overwhelming position like a Bateman, for example, but could be used there. The variety of alignment last year, he played 193 snaps wide left, 147 wide right, 132 slot. That's a balanced receiver. A lot of guys kind of fall into that. I don't know how Beckham was last year. I need to look at that for the expectations show we're doing on him coming up. But it's possible the Ravens looked at that and said he has some productivity or alignment value or problems that we can either focus his play on to get that value or eliminate those problems. And one thing with a high drop receiver that comes to mind is he may have a favorite shoulder. And so you may want to get him on one side of the field to reduce those number of drops.
Yeah. I think I agree with all of that. I mean, let's see what we get out of him. I mean, one thing I did see last season early was good separation as well. I don't think he has that top end speed anymore, but I do think he has the ability to separate, especially over the middle. And I'm hoping that we can see a little of that next year. And I think if he can, show that, I think he can actually carve out some snaps for himself. Even with Flowers coming in or Bateman coming back, I think his ability to separate is something that Lamar really hasn't had from the receiver position at all in his time for the Ravens. And just watching some of those highlights early in the season, I think he had a hamstring about halfway through the season or, week 4 or 5 or something like that. And I don't think he was the same player as well. I think that also could go against his record. I know, you've been pulling up his last season a lot, but I think he did have to battle through some injuries as well. So we'll see if he can stay healthy, and we'll see if he can create that separation.
That's been one of the positives to point to is his durability has been outstanding in the NFL, or very good, I'd say. Maybe not outstanding, but he's only missed 12 games in an 8-year career. There are some guys obviously who play every game, but that's really exceptional. Is that he can stay on the field that much. Be interesting to see if he's used in a special teams role. I would not expect that off the start, based on the fact if Bateman is not healthy, because I think they'll want to be too careful with the receivers they do have,
right,
to try and make sure they can keep them around. But he is a guy, as the season rolls on, he might be able to help you on special teams, gunner or whatnot, on punts in particular. And it'd be interesting to see how they use him there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's all depending on the health of that room, it seems like.
Okay, one other thing that I think is a reason for optimism, that I think it might be something the Ravens said, okay, this is more like the situation with Derek Carr than it is the situation with Mac Jones in New England. And that is that Lamar is certifiably an extended play quarterback, consistently has some of the longest time to throws of any quarterback in the league. And that's a big advantage in terms of separation players and speed players making space for themselves. So if that could turn into something useful, and there's more to it than that, because the really great extended play players also have an instinct for where the space is at the end of the play. And so it's not about raw speed, but it can be, he can have a little more time for separation playing with Lamar. And I like that. You mentioned some of the crossing the field issues. That's where some of that space can be created late, is dragging an opposing corner who's in single coverage across the field and gaining additional ground on him there.
Right. And I feel like that's where it seems like some of his bigger plays have been on, either extended plays or just down the field throws. So we'll see what we can get. I really like our ability in the receiver room to kind of grow together. We'll see what we get. I think Agholor could be his best thing that could come from him is his ability to kind of be a bridge for both Bateman coming back slowly and also Zay Flowers getting ramped up. And then he might get phased out. So he could just be a good bridge guy that for the first month of the season, you're like, oh, this guy looks really good. And then by the end of the season, he's barely getting any snaps at all. But for that, it could help us get us a couple wins early on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I completely buy into that. And I think that's what the Ravens are thinking in making this move at the cost it came, as opposed to later. They had to be really concerned about the health of the room. I don't know what the situation is with Duvernay. There were comments that he might have even been back for the playoff game if they'd been able to continue. But I don't have a great feeling about that. And I haven't seen any kind of thing in the off season about Duvernay's health. Nothing, no update on exactly where he is. If he comes to camp and he's playing fine, well, okay, great. If he's not, then we obviously may still have an issue. Okay. You hit on the run blocking earlier. He was not an effective run blocker in 22, but if you look at his PFF scoring for his whole career, he's been pretty good in his early years, particularly at Philadelphia and even at Las Vegas. And um, a slight plus run blocker is how I would define him over the period before 22. Maybe it was injuries. I do think that's an area where he will have to get better with the Ravens.
Right, for sure. I mean, Harbaugh, you're not on the field if you can't block at the receiver position, essentially. So, we'll see what we can get out of them there.
Right. So for 23, I think we both talked about it a little bit, but a backup X and a fourth or fifth wide receiver role is where I would hope he ends up. You'd hope certainly that Zay Flowers, who's terrifically important, Bateman, and Beckham all get more snaps for sure. I think there's a question of whether a Duvernay gets more snaps. And I wouldn't say it's out of the question that somebody else who we don't know yet, whether it's a veteran outside the organization, a young player they scarf from another roster. And the idea would be that Bateman's not ready to go in week one. They need a fifth receiver. All of a sudden they find a way to get this guy in the offense, and we have something that is exciting. It's potential that Agholor could get not beat out of a roster spot, but beat out for some snaps by a player like that.
Right. I mean, that's for sure. So I think that really comes down to Bateman's health, how comfortable they are if they're going to bring somebody else in, because I mean, they have bodies. Like, it's not like Tylan Wallace and Prochet went anywhere. They're just down. They're somewhere. So they have guys that they've liked enough to bring in, and they've given them some opportunities to make plays out there. I think that Agholor has an advantage over Duvernay because the one thing is, even when Duvernay had that, I think it was last season, he had some good plays, but he didn't create any separation. And that was, I think, that his biggest issue is he's a speedster that doesn't create separation. He's made some great contested catches for us, but that's not a strength in his game where you need that out of a top end receiver. Whereas Agholor, at least you're going to see some space in the field, and Lamar's going to see an easier throw than he would be with Duvernay. So I think that's where he gets the advantage over him.
I don't deny what you're talking about. Devin Duvernay just certifiably catches the football better than Agholor does. It's not even close. And that is most of the difference in the two of them and their yards per target number. Because Duvernay last year, it certainly wasn't bad at all. 8.3 yards per target last year. He was 5.8 the year before, so it's not like it's always worked out with him. Again, that it might be the reverse Agholor situation. We have to figure out which is the real Duvernay there in terms of that. He gives you something as a jet player, and maybe Agholor will be that. You think there's some possibility that Agholor would be a jet player as opposed to, say, Flowers or Duvernay?
Yeah, I can see that, or even a bubble screen guy, just a guy get him the ball. Let's see what he can do. Give him something easy to catch on just a little bubble screen and say, hey, go get 7-8 yards on this. We need a first down. We need an easy conversion. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So let's get down to it in terms of what a good season is for Nelson Agholor and what a great season is. So for you, define it any way you like. I might ask you about it after the fact, but what's a good season for Nelson Agholor for you?
I think a good season is just he's the bridge. He's the bridge to Bateman's health. He's the bridge to Zay Flowers getting comfortable with the offense. He's a guy that can fight for snaps and make some big plays for us. I think that's kind of what a good season looks like for him. Again, without having any sort of track record on what Monken's offense is going to look like for us, it's hard to be like, oh, he's going to have 5 touchdowns or blah, blah, blah. It's hard to say, even comparing him to looking at the Georgia's offense and bringing that here. So I think just being the bridge is what a good season looks like.
Yeah, I think that, by the way, that's a great way to define it. I didn't do it that way. I'm kind of not thinking that's the greatest way, but I like your way. And I'll set some performance minimums that aren't stat related. I think he has to have speed that remains such that he can separate versus single coverage and create pressure on safeties to make space. Got to have some gravitational pull on the safety, or he's not really doing the job he needs to do as an X receiver for the tight ends and Beckham and slot receivers, whoever else it might be, who's underneath. I think he fills in for Bateman at a level that is at least slightly lower than the league average. I'm expecting to be above the replacement level, but below the league average level based on where he was last year. If he could come in higher than that, and it's possible because this is a 60th percentile season, it's not an 80th percentile season, then that would really be fantastic for the Ravens if he could deliver them a higher level of play than that. I'd say that Monken will find a way to use his tools to otherwise threaten defenses other than just what he can do as a simple X, trying to make some wiggle, trying to create space that way and trying to draw the safety. But that Monken finds some other way. It might be jet, it might be crossing the field, it might be some other rub concept or whatever. I don't know. I can't imagine it, but I hope Monken can in terms of exactly how he would use him, and that could be potentially exciting. And I think in general, I want him to finish with improved metrics due to a better connection with Jackson than he had with Mac Jones. And a lot of that's still on him. The drops, they're on him. The contested catch rate is probably mostly on him. Not all, but mostly. Probably got some low quality contested catches because it's Mac Jones. But I want to see him improve, generally speaking, in those metrics. He can't be in the bottom quartile of every single freaking metric like it seemed like he was last year.
Yeah, that's for sure.
How about a great season? What's a great season?
A great season is, I'll take that bridge analogy. It's just like when he is in that role early in the season, he capitalizes. He pops on the field to the point where you start saying, hey, we can't take him off the field, or we can't reduce his snap count to put in Flowers so much, or take him out on some of those preferred routes that we completely change our offense. I think a great season for him looks like he becomes just like a super reliable deep threat or big play guy that, he might not get all the targets, but for some reason he'll find the end zone a handful of times. He'll make a couple big 40, 50-yard plays that you're like, wow, why are we throwing to their fourth receiver? And why is he this open? I think that's what a great season looks like from him. His ability to create space comes back to what he looks like on the Raiders and some of those early Philly days. He becomes more of a reliable target for Lamar down the field, and somebody that, we can ease Bateman back into, and he can say, okay, hey, like, take as much time as you need. You're handling this spot. That's what a great season looks like for him.
That would be certainly very great. If you're looking to look at the percentile of outcomes, you look ahead at the possible range of outcomes for a player like Agholor in this year. And, there's obviously a lot of really bad ones where he's hurt early on, doesn't happen. Then there's others where he's just ineffective because that's what he was the last year. And there's others where, he's not terrible, but he doesn't reach the 2020 level again either. If you're looking at the range of potential outcomes for who this guy might be with the Ravens in 2023, where do you think what you've just described would be? What percent?
Pretty low. Yeah. Honestly, probably under 20%. But that's also because look how many mouths we have to feed on that offense too. Because we're not talking about the tight end room likely. We're sitting here talking about the receivers and what Agholor can do to fight his spot for that. He's still going to have to compete for targets. And obviously, I feel like they're going to do a little bit more of the screen game. And so you got Dobbins involved. So, I mean, it's hard to say, hey, how are you going to carve out a great season in a room full of talent, or at least a room full of mouths to feed?
Yeah.
I think that's what I would say.
Yeah. One of the reasons to look forward to the mouths to feed argument is there's going to be a lot more targets this year. I mean, they only had, I think they threw 488 passes last year, but it'll be a lot more this year. The Roman offense, which was great, honestly, if you look at the 4 years of Roman offense, very effective for the Ravens in terms of completely controlling the clock, totally reducing snap count in games, keeping the defense fresh with that by keeping the ball longer, and just strictly from a run play versus pass play perspective, run plays take longer off the clock than pass plays do. Pass plays have incomplete passes that do that. Pass plays have a lot more out of bounds endings to them that end up stopping the clock. So it's the Ravens are going to have many more passes. The flip side of that, and the part that's really difficult, and we'll talk about this a little bit more with Travis Jones, is that they're going to have to play a lot more defensive snaps. And because of it, and that potentially has some wear down effect the Ravens might not be happy with. But you also get to wear down the other team on offense, and that's nice as well. I'll tell you what I had for a great season for Agholor. I said, supported by extended pocket times, finds a new home in the Ravens as a deep threat. And his season is more reminiscent of 2020 than all of his other NFL seasons. Gets rotated in for freshness. You hit this about, that they, even when Flowers is healthy, they still use both. They still find a way to use both. And he produces enough that he draws safety attention regularly. Targeted at least 50 times for 8.5 yards per target. It's the only numbers I'm going to stick in there are a kind of a minimum target number and a 8.5 yards per target. I think if he could do that, I think the Ravens would benefit from having him. And to me, that's about an 80th percentile result.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I love that. That sounds good to me. If we can get something like that out of him, I'd use him as a great pass blocker, somebody at, maybe he's on the field more than Flowers just because in the run game, he's more valuable than Flowers is early on.
Yeah, it is a little scary to think that the Ravens might be as shorthanded as they seem to be in terms of run blocking ability at wide receiver. They've got great run blocking tight ends on the thing. They've got Ricard, but they're presumably be running a lot versus 11 personnel rather. And when you do that, your receivers have to contribute something. They have to contribute something. You got 3 of them on the field. You can't just have nothing out of those guys. So. All right. Well, we had our production meeting beforehand, and we thought, this might be a long discussion because I think we have some healthy debate on exactly who Nelson Agholor is, and how likely he is to help the Ravens this season. What are some of the positives to look at? And great debate. Really appreciate that, John. And we're going into Travis Jones here. I'm guessing we might both love Travis Jones.
Just a little bit, I mean. God, it seems like we just talked about how the Steelers, they breed receivers. I feel like the Ravens breed defensive linemen or just that front. So he's another guy that you looked at the tape when he got drafted and you're like, how did this guy slip to the 3rd round? I get he goes to UConn, whatever. But it's crazy how athletic he looks and how comfortable he looked last season as a rookie, especially early.
Yeah, it was great that he was able to step in the way he did. Pierce was injured in the 3rd game, and it is not typical for Ravens defensive linemen in their rookie season to play as many snaps as Travis Jones did, and particularly ones who have a limited role. So Travis Jones was pretty much a nose tackle only last year for the Ravens. Some of that was the fact that Pierce got hurt, forced him into that role. He didn't play until week 3. That's when Pierce got injured. And Jones ended up playing 30% of the snaps as a rookie, including 2 games that he wasn't even on the field for. So that's an impressive number. If you go back to Brandon Williams, I don't remember what his, but it wasn't anywhere near as high during his rookie season.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at film from Brandon Williams and looking at film from Travis Jones, it just seems like. Travis Jones looks like he shoots out of a cannon sometimes, and the way he can escape, get off blocks is just. It's crazy because I felt like Brandon Williams was like our Vince Wilfork. He was a space eater. He just kind of clogged the middle, and it was like, well, that's how you're shutting down the run game. Travis Jones does that, maybe not to the extent of Brandon Williams, but his ability to get off of those blocks and actually either make a play or make the running back or quarterback make a little extra wiggle to give, Queen or now Roquan some time to get in there to clean it up is really impressive, especially for how little he's been on the field with us. So I just think his role is going to be huge next year. And another reason that we kind of were like, well, Calais, we got to use your money elsewhere. We can make do with the guys we have in the room.
Completely agree on the comments about penetration in particular. And the Ravens are underutilizing in some ways, or they're not getting full value of his penetration when he's playing nose tackle, because most of the time he's going to start with a double team at that spot, meaning either one guard and the center is going to be on him. He won't be straight up against the center. That's a real recipe for disaster if you want to put Travis Jones straight up against your center, whether pass blocking or run blocking. But if you want to get him a one-on-one matchup on a regular basis, got to move him to 3-tech. And 3-tech, you typically get to play one-on-one against the guard. The combination I want to see is him at the 3 and Pierce at the nose tackle 1 position. And I think that could be incredibly powerful for the Ravens. First of all, Pierce himself is a terrific athlete, and just hope we can keep him on the field this year because he's really important to the Ravens. But if Jones is allowed to go one-on-one against a three tech, he's going to be against a guard rather. He's going to be in the backfield all year. He's going to be a guy who's in there on run plays. It may occasionally be frustrating in terms of he runs himself out of position. It's for the linebackers to clean that up if that happens, by the way. But I think then it's going to be much more fun to see all the running plays that he disrupts with some first contact in the backfield, or denies space, or forces a bubble to one side, or bifurcates the field to force the running back to have less space to work with, let alone what he could do in the passing game. So I think that I would love to see as many three-tech snaps as possible for Travis Jones this year. And I think it really fits with one of the Ravens' other big needs, which is to keep Justin Madubuike better rested. Yeah. And he's critical to their pass rush. And the only way you can get him off the field more often is to basically get him to avoid playing early down three-tech snaps. And played 59% last year. If you look at two things, how he played as the season went on, he was worse as the season went on, and how he played in terms of individual games, his best games were low snap count games. So, play to that strength. I know Madubuike is a chiseled Adonis this year. At least that's how, he's been described, and he was chiseled before. So I have a hard time figuring out how he could be anymore. But still, he seems to have a playing time limitation that I hope the Ravens will observe carefully.
Right. I mean, that's some of the biggest headaches with our defense over the last couple of years. It seems like our defensive line has always worn out as the season has gone on. Whether that was the pass rush with Justin Houston a couple of years ago, where in OA, like it just seems like there's always one or two positions on that line that we're relying on one or two guys to do too much. And by the end of the season, they're almost not a shell of themselves, but they're just not, that effectiveness is just not there. And I think it's interesting. You said, you want to see Travis just play that three. I was listening to, the Ravens, the Lounge podcast, and they had him on, and they asked him, hey, what position do you see yourself playing on the line? And he said he wanted to play nose. So it's kind of interesting to hear him talk about that. That's the position that he sees himself in, or is the best fit. Yeah, very interesting. So, as time goes on, we'll see if maybe they do a little pivoting between him and Pierce to just flip them back and forth and just see what happens there.
Well, honestly, if they want him to play nose and Pierce to play three, I could live with that also. But the Ravens have a history of this. The Ravens, when Pierce was an undrafted rookie free agent, he was clearly one of their best defensive linemen. They moved Brandon Williams to three. Yeah. Brandon Williams was not perfect for the three-tech role. He's not the same kind of penetrator that Jones is. Jones has characteristics that are just outstanding in terms of strength and quickness. In terms of strength, Brandon Williams had them all. In terms of quickness, he really doesn't. Yeah. And that was it was a great move at the time for the Ravens to do that with the 1-3 move with Pearson Williams. And I think this is the next really great opportunity they've had to do it. They've had a lot of different body types along the lines. They haven't had too much of two massive nose tackles who are both among their most talented players. And now that they've got it again, figure out how to use these two guys at the same time. I mean, you want them both on the same downs. So don't make them compete with each other for an eyedropperization of snaps when both could play more. Try and rest some of your other players who you really want on third down. Brandon Williams, not Brandon Williams, the other three tech.
Madubuike?
No, the other one.
Broderick
Washington. Yeah. He knocked down a bunch of passes last year. He's a guy you want in on passing downs a lot. You probably also want him in on early downs as well. You could have him in on early downs as a 5, but he gives you some things in the passing game that are positive. And Madubuike, honestly, just got to play less snaps to be effective. It's painfully obvious from what happened last year that he really needs to have a reduced snap count.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like he's going to be highly motivated with his contract year. And
oh yeah,
we already know we're going to be probably saying goodbye to him. So we'll see what kind of contract he gets on the open market.
Let's say goodbye to him after a 9-sack season where
I would
he's
love that.
a DPOY candidate. That would be the way to go.
That'd be great. Love that.
A little bit more about Jones. He was used almost exclusively as an early down run defender. That's 34 out of 342 snaps last year. Came with only 34, came on third or fourth down. So it's only a tenth of his snaps. It's a prototype kind of nose tackle usage that you get that guy off the field on third down. You have a kick in outside linebacker if you're the Ravens. Sometimes you have two, and you also have one guy who you really love as a pass rusher more. In the case of last year, that was Campbell, and when they used two early in the season because they didn't have outside linebackers to kick in, then it was also Matabike. So I think Matabike will still fill that role on third down. I think they're going to be back to kick in outside linebackers, and wouldn't absolutely shock me if Travis Jones gets a little more third down love because of what he can do earlier, if they really test out who he is as a pass rusher.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think that the Ravens do a good job of kind of slow playing some of those rookie guys, and then they kind of see what they can do. And then after a while, they just start kind of unleashing them, and they just kind of start throwing them in weird positions that you never know where he's going to line up. I mean, I think McDonald's is as creative as Wink was. I think that he utilizes the talent a lot better too, or at least in the one season he gave with us. I think he forms his scheme to what our strengths are, kind of like what Monken's kind of brought in to do. Mm-hmm. Hey, I'm going to build an offense around what we have, as opposed to, hey, this is what I do. So I'm hoping to see that continue to grow like it did last year. Obviously, it was kind of slow. You look back at the Miami game and some of those other ones where you got Hamilton out of position, or we have, some of those young corners getting beat deep, and we end up losing that game. So I think there's going to be some growing pains, but I think this is a pretty established team, side of the ball, at least. A lot of those guys, they're all coming back at least for a year, with the year experience with McDonald.
Yeah, I do. I would not, by the way, McDonald proved to be very good, I think, very adept at adapting his game plan to the opponent, and also some making changes. But both those are also extreme strengths of Wink Martindale. I think we've got two coordinators here that have left in the last couple of years, and Roman, I really dislike people pretending like Roman was a terrible coordinator. He wasn't. He's the best offensive coordinator the Ravens have ever had. It's not close. If it is close, it's Kubiak for 1 year in 2014, getting a big year out of Flacco. But it really, I mean, what they were able to do in years 2 through 5 of Lamar Jackson is just remarkable. And I think Lamar should recognize it. I think that the Ravens should recognize that they do. I don't think that's a problem. I think the Ravens media and fans really just need to appreciate how good he was. And we'll have it bad again someday. We'll have a really bad offensive coordinator who makes a lot of mistakes, because the Ravens had a bunch of guys. Remember Mark Trestman? Do you remember some of the other guys they had?
Morningweg.
Yeah, Morningweg is another one who not particularly good. They've had a bunch of guys that didn't work out, and then finally they get one who's outstanding. They made him wait to get the job for quite a while. I mean, make him wait for an extra year behind Marty Morningweg. After he's already been in here managing tight ends or run game coordinator, or whatever the hell his title was before he got to be offensive coordinator. They really waited. Then they built the offense around Lamar Jackson with Roman, and you couldn't have done it better. You couldn't have done it better. I mean, he immediately, not only did Jackson have one of the greatest years in the history of the NFL, but he also had a limited offensive cast who produced, and certainly in terms of salary in particular, who produced one of the greatest points per drive season that's ever been delivered. And if you compare that to the cap spent on that team, it was an unbelievable. It's one of the greatest coaching jobs of all time to put together that offense in that way and succeed the way they did. And then everything he did after that is compared to 2019 Lamar. And it to me, unbelievably unfair to Greg Roman over that period.
I agree with that. I mean, what we're definitely a spoiled fan base in the last 4 years with Lamar coming in, with Roman the way he did. I mean, I think some of the biggest notes that you hear Ravens fans complain about is with Roman was a couple of things. You just see like lack of creativity, lack of creativity, lack of ability to adjust in game, and lack of ability to come back in games. Amazing how well we looked in that 2019 season because we're up in every single game. We're winning every single game pretty much from the first drive on. But when the chips were down and we're not able to come back from a 10-point lead. And then when you have Mahomes out here, who it doesn't even seem like a 14-point lead is safe for anyone, then what are we talking about? Okay, we can possess the ball like anyone else. We can
not
control
like better than anyone else.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's what I meant to say. But the issue is Mahomes is going to score. I don't care what the defense is doing. He's shown that, and there's a couple other quarterbacks that can do the same. I think that Philly's another team that's kind of built like that, that can kind of come back in games or keep themselves in games regardless. And I just didn't see over time, especially as the years went on, it just felt like teams kind of figured us out. They boxed us up. And when we didn't either have the running backs, when we had every age veteran running back coming back in.
By the way, we haven't learned anything about that, it doesn't seem, but yes.
For sure. So I think that's the biggest thing. And then you look back to his Kaepernick days. The issue with Roman is he's super effective in that first season. And then you look, the numbers deteriorate over time. And again, that's there. We have two instances of that. I mean, I think he was.
I would buy that, but John, how do you explain the fact that he's been around the league forever and he's still able to come back with a new quarterback and put together one of the greatest offensive seasons of all time? If they truly had figured Roman out, then it wouldn't matter who they had. And Colin Kaepernick and in his early years and Lamar Jackson, there's a difference between the two, but it wasn't just a scheme. Sorry. I think it would be foolish to not give Roman credit for coming up with a scheme that was remarkable for Lamar Jackson in that 2019 season. And frankly, in the 2018 season as well, because Lamar is very limited as a quarterback in that year. He completely changed his ability to throw. Roman found a way to win 6 out of 7 games down the stretch. They had a great defensive team that got the job done, but it was Roman getting those consistent first downs with Lamar that was a big part of that team.
Right. I'm not trying to bash Roman. I'm just trying to give you the other side of like where that anger comes from or that frustration with him comes from.
Yeah.
Those couple notes. But again, I mean, what are we complaining about here? We had one of the most exciting and fun 5-year stretches that we could have had. I just think I think they would have lost a lot of the fan base if they would have kept him around this year. And I mean, you look at the Hollywood Brown thing. I think that essentially that was, he came in and said, it's either Roman or it's me. And they said, well, we're picking Roman this year. And then, but again, it hurt our ability. Yeah. Great choice. Great choice. We'll take that every time. But again, it hurt our ability to bring in any sort of outside receiver help. And then it made us have to waste more draft capital at that position. And we haven't hit. So I think that overall it was time to separate. And same thing with Wink. It was time to separate.
Well, okay. First of all, the case of Roman, don't have any disagreement on that. It was time to separate. What the problem I have is the bashing of Roman after the fact. Is that people don't realize just how incredibly great he was. They want to poo-poo everything the guy did, and frankly, great offensive coordinator. He put together an incredible stretch of play under Lamar Jackson. Was it time to go? I do believe it was time to move on too. I don't really blame him for what happened in the last 2 years. I think most of that is Huntley. And the fact that you drop off from Lamar to Huntley means you just can't run your offense anymore. It's just effectively what that means. Should he have had something he could pivot to? Yes, perhaps so. But if you've got Tyler Huntley on the field, you're just not going to be a very good offensive football team. I mean, it's just it starts there. It's that it really hurts you to be in that position. But with Wink, my feeling is different about it. I didn't think they had to let Wink go at all. I think that they could have signed him, but there was a disagreement about whether they wanted to commit for that 1 year only or wanted to commit for multiple years. And the Ravens said, okay, we're ambivalent enough and don't want to give you a multi-year deal that we're just going to let you roll now, and we'll part ways on a mutually understood basis. I don't think he was forced out by any means. I think he kind of forced himself out by saying, I want a multi-year deal. The Ravens said no. And then they talked about it and they said, should we just part ways now?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of positive things about Wink. I mean, especially him taking over from Dean Pease. And I was just I was ready for Dean Pease to go. Let's just say that. So, I mean, him coming back, and it felt like when Wink came back, we got our defense back. It felt like Dean Pease was just kind of like there again. He was with that aging veteran team, so not as effective. But it just felt like people didn't fear us the way they feared us when Wink was our coordinator, for sure. Go ahead.
I just want to say this: the Ravens have been remarkably fortunate in their entire history. They've never really had a bad defensive coordinator. And people are going to say, well, what about Madison, for example? He wasn't bad. He was kind of a little bit of a caretaker that was just there for a couple of years before Pagano came in and after Rex Ryan, I believe. Might have been somebody in between. I might have even been forgetting. But I mean, the litany of the guys have all gone to great success out of that coordinator role is remarkable. I mean,
insane.
It's to have all of those guys go on to head coaching roles or big jobs other places. It's much deserved. But let's get back to Travis Jones, because we're running very long on this episode. There's one other thing I need to talk about, and that is the defense and how they're going to figure out how to get the snaps played that are going to be vacated by Calais Campbell. And it's kind of interesting we're talking about this, because Calais Campbell was a 34-year-old player when he came to the Ravens. And after his age 36 season, we're still saying, oh my God, how are we going to replace his snaps? and
for sure.
And he's playing, just a ton of defensive snaps still. He came to the Ravens. He played between 77 and 80% of the snaps every single year for 5 consecutive years, which is a record of consistency that I've never observed before in any particular player. And the Ravens reduced his snaps, which is the right thing to do. They play much more rotational play than Jacksonville and Arizona had, who relied on him more heavily. And that was good, but it's just still incredible to me that he's going somewhere at age 37. He's probably going to play 50% of the snaps for Atlanta. And the guy is just ageless.
For sure. I mean, how do you take him off the field? I mean, even in special teams, he's blocking field goals. It's like, this is ridiculous. So I think that would hurt the most this offseason, and just saying goodbye to him with just kind of having to move that cap around. I think that was definitely huge, a huge loss for us. But I do think it's the one position group that you're like, if you're going to take a guy out, even if it's him, you might be able to patch together something, because they've been able to do it before. And the Ravens defense is at its best when the D line is one of the best position groups on the field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but then you're losing Campbell. You risk that not being the case. So of course, but I do like it. I like what they potentially can do with this group they have. I do think it's paper thin. That if they have an injury or two there, they're going to really feel it in a way that most other teams would not. But I looked at last year, and there's some things that are tricky about last year that make it the Ravens don't have to duplicate their snap count in one way, and they have to more than duplicate their snap count in another. Let me talk about those. Last year, they had 2.22 defensive linemen per play. It's not the outside linebackers, but 2.2 pure defensive linemen per play. That's high for the Ravens. They normally would play something like 2.0 for multiple reasons. First of all, if you think about it, when you play nickel defense, you have exactly 2 on the field. When you play your base defense, you have 3 on the field, but base defense is not a big part of the modern NFL, because other team goes to 11 personnel. You're forced into a nickel look. That essentially means you have to have 2 defensive linemen on the field at that time. And then furthermore, when you get to obvious passing downs, the Ravens' way has been to replace 1 defensive lineman with a 3rd outside linebacker on the field rushing from the inside. last year, they didn't have that for the whole season because they didn't have healthy outside linebackers to play. They did later in the year when they had JPP and Houston came to the team. Then they had some more guys to mix and match with. But they didn't early in the year, and that really increased that number of defensive linemen who had to be on the field on a per-play basis. So the good news is I think the Ravens will be able to reduce their total DL snaps to something like 2.0 this year, gets rid of 10% of the snaps, just from the fact that they'll be able to go to more kick-in plays and hopefully have some leads and avoid base defense more. So have other teams passing to catch up, and they get to play. They'll play more 11, and they'll play 2 defensive linemen on more plays. So that was one thing. Anything to say about all that? By the way, I know that's a lot.
No. I mean, hey, you got the numbers, so I'm going off of what you're telling me. I mean, I mean, we'll see. Like, you're right, the D line is thin. So we've had other thin lines, and then we've had seasons that we've lost because the D line was too thin, and just couldn't create that pass rush. And I think that hurt Wink in a couple of those years, and when he had to rely a lot on those one-on-one coverages from corners to send blitzes and try to create pressure that way, that kind of hurt a lot of his stock. Some of those seasons where, that was kind of the note Ravens fans always said, he's always putting guys in one-on-one positions and we don't have the guys to cover these guys. But I think a lot of that is what you're saying is maybe because we needed the D-line to help them create some pressure.
Okay, I don't want to get too far removed from this because I really want to talk about like how these defensive linemen are going to fill the snap counts by Calais Campbell. The second part is the bad news, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, is that because Monken is coming in, the offense is going to be moving the ball around. That means the average drive length for the Ravens is going to be fewer plays because there'll be predictably bigger plays, I would think, and also that they're going to have more possessions for both team in the games because the possessions are shorter. So I would expect Monken to be, if the average was, say, between 10 and 11 offensive drives per game for the Ravens during the Lamar area the last few years, and I haven't looked at it exactly to know, I'd expect about 1.25 more possessions per game, or about a 10% increase in snaps go in the other direction,
right?
Where you have additional defensive linemen, you have to play snaps. So by percentage of snaps, the Ravens, I think, can get there with the players they have, but by number of snaps, I'm more worried about it in terms of you get tired based on number of snaps, and by consecutive snaps played, more than you do by percentage of snaps played, which is a more notional number.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. I think that's a great storyline that a lot of people aren't talking about. That's something that we're going to have to watch and see how that plays out. Let's see how effective the offense is. Let's see if that makes the defense less effective. And, what are we going to get? I mean, I will say our D-line for the most part is young. So that's one advantage we do have is we're not throwing the 36-year-old out there and asking him to play more. We're throwing the 20-some-year-olds out there and guys that are actually hungry to play, like Broderick Washington, like those Madubuike, they want to play. I think that they've been in that weird rotation where they've had those huge veteran guys and those guys that you're not peeling off the field for any reason. So I think they're trying to make a name for themselves. So we'll see what happens. I mean, I think Travis Jones is going to be a huge part in that. Is his ability to stay healthy and be the player who we drafted and who we saw last year.
Yeah, it's a really good point about they're generally younger on the defensive line. They still have Michael Pierce, who's had some injury problems and is now over 30, but I would generally agree they're as weighted by playing time. They're certainly a pretty young defensive line in terms of where they are. And the Ravens, they've liked their veterans over the years. They've had plenty of veteran defensive linemen around. And they've also had some good in-season success finding them. Oftentimes, the Ravens practice squad, I always point out, is the poaching grounds for every other NFL team. If you lose defensive linemen, you're one short. Who do the Ravens have in their practice squad? That's your first question. On the other side, the Ravens have been pretty good, in particularly 2018, at rebuilding a defensive line on the fly that had some serious injuries. They get them out of Pecco and Jelly Ellis, both on the line at the same time. And those guys helped them get through that season, and they were pretty damn good defensive players. it was it was a nice thing to be able to see the Ravens put together. Wait, that was 2019, right? Did I say it was 18?
Yeah.
Anyway, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get back to it. We'll finish up here with what's a good season for Travis Jones, and define it as you will.
A good season for him is just his ability to just take pressure off Pierce. Flip for that 1-3 role. Hopefully, take some pressure off Madubuike. Be that space filler in the middle of the field that we need, we love, and in our best seasons we seem to always have. Just eat the space. So I think that's what I think a good season looks like for him is just his ability to be a guy that teams have to account for, whether he's playing the 1 or the 3. Somebody that they're afraid of, they have to game plan for, they have to do something. And his ability to help others create sacks, create pressures, deflections, and other things like that.
Okay, it's very good. I have a lot of that myself, so there's going to be some repeat here. But I'd start by saying I don't have any specific goals in terms of a pass rush, and I think that you didn't make any either. But I'd like to see him be a little more effective in terms of one-on-one as a pass rusher, but not leading any specific stats that I have. I'd like some small steps forward in technique and ability to deal with defensive tackles, with double teams. And that's an area where all defensive linemen tend to struggle some. If you're double teamed, you just tend to get pushed around a little bit. And it's the rare guy who has the strength and low center of gravity and pad level and all that you want that can really hold his ground pretty well. But I think Travis Jones could be one of those guys, and I think that'd be a good season if we would see more of that. All I want is a marginal improvement off last year is what I'm talking about. One thing we didn't mention earlier because we were skipping around a little bit between various topics is Travis Jones was one freaking great rate tackler in 2022. He only missed either 1 or 0, depending on the source you use. Pro Football Reference says 0. Pro Football Focus says 1 tackle the entire year. So either a 0 or 4% missed tackle rate. And that's terrific if he could maintain that. So that would really be good. In terms of one other thing, I would like to see him play about 40 to 45% of the snaps, even if Michael Pierce is healthy. I think that's the proper increment to his snap count that I'd want, and it's kind of a minimum. Now, obviously, he has to stay healthy as well to that kind of a number for the year. If Pierce is lost, I would expect that number to catapult up into the 50s. Because obviously the Ravens are going to have trouble finding the bodies to put on the field. I think that does it for a good season for me. But just a marginal increases in productivity, some one-on-one wins as a pass rusher, 40 to 45% of snaps.
Right. Sounds good to me.
How's a great season for you?
A great season. He becomes the Michael Pierce 2.0 to the Brandon Williams, where it's at the point where he's the guy that we're like, hey, let's move Pierce around. Let's put Travis Jones as the nose. Let's see him eat the space. And I think that, within that, he would have to show his ability to rush the passer, get some sacks, or at least get some pressures that lead to sacks, where you're talking about a guy that, he's taking on double teams, and his ability to create so much havoc back there that other guys are just eating. Madubuike, for instance, Owe, Ojabo, those seasons, those productivity numbers go way up, and it's everyone's going to talk about the pass rush, but it's really coming from the interior line. So yeah. I think that's what a great season looks like for him is he's threatening Pierce at that nose, pretty much from the start, and to the point where they're just kind of like, hey, let's reduce your snap count, Pierce, and let's see what Travis Jones can do, or let's move you around and let's get a little more creative and see what happens.
It's just fascinating on a couple levels. First of all, I really love the notion that he would improve the pass rate statistics of everybody else, pass rush rate statistics of everybody else along that line. I think the Ravens have lived off second man opportunities, and that was part of what I had. Pass rush may not show up in gaudy sack total, but pocket compression creates second man opportunities, and I think you're right on the money. As far as the 1-3 thing goes, it's not immediately obvious to me why Jones would not be the better choice for 3 tech than Pierce. but I'm okay either way it works. I just want to see them both on the field at the same time. If the coaches, if McDonald thinks, yep, our best 1-3 combination is respectively Jones and Pierce at the 3, fine. I think Pierce could be devastating to opposing guards, getting low and pushing them right back into the quarterback quickly to try and create that need to pull the ball down and change your position, which inevitably leads to more dangerous situations for the quarterback, whether that's down the field or in terms of sacks. I don't want his run defense to improve modestly at nose tackle and dramatically when used as a 3 tech. So what I mean by that is he's going to face a lot of double teams on the nose. He's just got to eat that space a little better. The good season level of being able to maintain his position at a better level than his rookie season is all I'm looking for. I'm not looking for some huge increment to his play. It could happen, but I'm not making it as a condition here. I'd like his snap count to exceed 50%, which will give the Ravens a lot of relief in terms of their 2024 DL rebuild, which is looming. So that is a daunting task. It's been daunting these last few years. Is you see all these old guys on the line and thinking, how the hell are we going to rebuild this thing? And they've had a couple of draft picks, and looks like Travis Jones has really worked out, and he certainly was a bargain in terms of where the Ravens got him. That's great, but now we really need him to play at the next level to make sure that rebuild is not just going to be the biggest kick in the gut we've faced.
For sure. Yeah, you're right. That is a big looming problem going into next year. And with Matabike probably leaving, we have Pierce for one more year after this, right?
No, I don't believe. I'll have to look at it. 1 second. Let me look.
No worries.
I think he had void years or something.
Because
I've looked this up before. Let's see. So Michael Pierce he's got void years. He's 2023 signed, and then he's got voided salary after that. So I mean, they could re-sign him, but he's out of here probably after this year.
Right. Yeah, that's going to be an Urban same way. I mean, another big body on the line.
Urban is a year-to-year signee, so he could be back, and he could be back at the vet minimum. So that honestly is a very realistic signing. Yeah, I had Brad on the show, of course, and he's a very realistic character in terms of who he is. So he'll be playing his 9th season this year, and talked about wanting to play 10 years. When you're an NFL vet min guy, like basically I think he will be for however long his career lasts from this point, he's just very realistic expectations. He probably expects to be cut on cut down day and then come back prior to week 1 after they've moved people to injured reserve, for example. He's very open about that and see to be, he understands that there's going to be a limited role for him. There'll be some rotation. He's just going to try and do the contributory things well. And I think the decision becomes more about at the vet minimum, where you want to play. Do you want to play in Baltimore, or do you want to move again and play somewhere in Texas, say, or, in Seattle or wherever it might be that you do that. So I think that it's easier to re-sign a guy like that who knows he's going to be playing for the vet minimum than a guy who really is concerned about, should I be making $2.5 million this year instead of $2 million this year? And that's where Michael Pierce might be next year. He may be thinking I should make $5 million as opposed to $4 million. And then it's going to come down to money with that.
For sure. I mean, again, it's one of those problems that I'm not as worried about, just because our ability to rebuild the line on the fly and also just through the draft. Mm-hmm. The Ravens have showed that over the years that is something that their scouts do a great job with. So that's something that you're right. It is a looming problem, but if there's one problem on the team that I want to have, it'd be that position group because
you think they can solve it.
Yeah.
And it's a good point. We didn't talk at all about who the undrafted free agents are, but they have a couple of guys. Kaim Caesar comes to mind, and they have a couple of bots or somebody else who are in the
trade bots.
Yeah, and in the group of UDFAs, and it's not unlikely that one of those guys makes the team if they like what they see. It's a tried and true Ravens method that they've been able to find these players. So, John, I really appreciate you coming on. I think the debate on Agholor very long and certainly very, very entertaining. I hope to folks to see both sides of this issue. And I really appreciate you taking the time to go through it in as much detail as we did. Tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
Honestly, hey, I'm not an online guy, man. I'm hoping to do something in the future, but I'm out in Seattle, so hey, if there's any Ravens fans out here nowadays, like let's go catch up, go catch a game or something. And I'm hoping to come to the New Year's game against the Dolphins in Baltimore. So
New Year's game against the Dolphins, okay.
Yeah, so I'm hoping to see some people in black and purple at that time.
All right, very good. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short, there's still plenty of time in July, and hit me up. This is the time. Down season, Ravens offices are closed, and the Ravens football talk is at a limit because there's no OTAs or other activities going on right now until camp starts. Love to hear from you, and I'll get back to you very quickly. DMs are always open on Twitter. John, thanks again for coming on.
Appreciate you, Ken.
I will talk to you next time on Film Study.